of maybe protecting a certain kind of cultural identity, maybe sustaining that? Um, or do you think that there might be some kind of fear that once that dish passes into foreign hands, that it might become unrecognizable, that maybe its essence might be lost? And then I want to leave you with this question as well. If the dish does change when it passes into other hands through substitution, maybe even migration, something that we're going to be talking about today, or the passage of time, does that original dish lose its meaning, its essence, its truth, or its claim to being that original dish at all? So I want you to keep these questions in mind as we move forward with our discussion today. Okay. All right. So I want to provide you with a bit of a roadmap for what we're going to be discussing today. I'd like to start off the discussion with a conversation about authenticity. So what we saw on the previous slide really relates to, well, true, or these kind of the essence behind a dish, keeping a dish authentic. So we're going to talk about authenticity as a claim. We're going to try to define it and link it to arguments of purity. And we're going to then link this to Gaitan's study that I mentioned earlier, From Sombreros to Sincronizadas, Authenticity, Ethnicity in the Mexican Restaurant Industry from 2008. We're also going to talk briefly about the outsider, as in a critic, food critics, or even clients at restaurants or tourists as authorities in terms of determining whether a food, a dish, a culture, a restaurant is authentic or not. We're also going to talk about migration and cultural exchange as engines of change. And we're going to talk about why why people or groups of people leave from one place to go to another, what they carry with them, and why these issues might complicate this notion of, quote, authenticity. We're going to move then to a culture that I'm most familiar with, which is Spanish culture. And we're going to talk a little bit about its history of migration and transformation in terms of traditional, and I say this in air quotes, traditional or authentic Spanish dishes. And then we'll close with this question, if authentic Spanish food is a myth or a reality. Okay, so we'll move on to authenticity and to this adjective, authentic. So, what I'd like you to do right now is to think about how you might answer these questions that appear on the right hand side of the screen. How would you describe an authentic person? You don't need to write anything down or raise your hand, but just think about what an authentic person might be like, how they might act, what they might say, what they might do. And then what might an authentic account of something that happened, as in testimony, for example, something that someone observed, what might that account look like or be like? The same thing goes for an authentic signature on a legal document. What does that mean? What does that adjective authentic mean in that context? Or the next question, what's an authentic example of French art? And what does it mean to live an authentic life? And then finally, what would an authentic jazz bar sound and look like? What kind of atmosphere might there be in an authentic jazz bar? So, now that we've seen those questions, listen to those questions, you'll see, of course, that I repeated that adjective authentic. What I would love for you to do, if you have access to it, if you're able, is to write in the chat what you believe some synonyms or maybe definitions of this adjective authentic are. And then I'll provide you with what the Cambridge Dictionary claims that this adjective means. But go ahead and we'll just check out and see what you all say in the chat. So Mary R says real, true. Elodie also says real, true to itself. Kelly, real, original. Carolyn, original. Mary R, not exaggerated. Sarah, accurate. Salem, origin, original. Mark, iconic. These are great. Wonderful. That's a great start. Great synonyms there. And feel free if you want to continue to write those in the chat, you can, but I'm going to move on to what the Cambridge Dictionary tells us about this adjective. So I see transparent, Chantel, thank you. So if the Cambridge Dictionary says that if something is authentic, it is real, it's true, or what people say it is. For example, we might hear someone talk about an authentic 1920s dress or a restaurant that serves authentic Italian food. Or in this example, he was there and saw what happened. So his is the only authentic account available where he was a witness, for example, to what happened. All right. Now, then, if something is authentic, according to the Cambridge Dictionary, it is what it appears to be. And they provide these examples. So it appears to be real. You all have said, a lot of you have said that already. For example, that isn't his real hair, is it? I thought it was a wig. Or it appears to be genuine, right? The painting is a genuine Picasso. Or it appears to be authentic or true. For example, the clerk certified that the documents were authentic. Okay, and all that comes from the Cambridge Dictionary. So I want us to keep these synonyms or these definitions in mind, and those comments that you all made as well in the chat. I see Sharon said traditional to a region could be what authentic would mean. I think those are excellent. Thank you. So we're going to move on, and we're going to talk about this concept of authenticity and how it can be useful, but it can also be somewhat problematic because to call something authentic, to determine or to deem that maybe a restaurant serves authentically Mexican food or an authentic dish from this culture is such and such, is in a way inadvertently calling something else inauthentic. Okay, the opposite maybe of the type of food that's provided somewhere is inauthentic. And when we think about what authentic is, many of you said real, true, original. Well, inauthentic, of course, would be the opposite. Okay, so the word doesn't just describe something, but it also creates hierarchies of something that is superior and then something that would be inferior to it. So if we deem something to be authentic, again, repeating a little bit, we deem it to be true, right? It corresponds to an original, verifiable source. We deem it also to be pure. And this is interesting language, the meaning that it's unmixed, it's untainted, uncontaminated by outside influence. It's real. It's not an imitation. Again, it's the original. As we see down below, it's not a substitute, and it is valuable. So if it is authentic, it has value to it. It's worthy of preservation, of prestige, but then also we're willing to pay a premium price for an original Monet, for example, okay, or for an authentic, delicious meal. So there on the right-hand side, we see the opposite. Things that are deemed inauthentic would be false. They would be impure. They would be tainted, diluted, hybridized. They would be an imitation. So therefore inferior, a derivative, less valuable. So something that is not worth preserving, it's not worth the price. And there is a political consequence to this dichotomy of authentic or inauthentic. So if we relate this back to food, the dishes, the traditions, and the people that are placed on that red side, that right-hand side of inauthentic, are judged as less worthy of our time, of our attention, of our money, and of our cultural respect. And since purity is a historical fiction, as every dish, if we're going back to food, is a hybrid, because we could argue that many different cuisines are a product of migration. This hierarchy doesn't describe reality at all. Another thing that I think is important for us to remember is that these adjectives of pure, for example, or also contaminated or hybridized are not neutral adjectives or descriptors. They do also carry the history of racial ideology into food discourse, often unintentionally. But we do need to keep that in mind. And unfortunately, we don't have enough time right now during the talk to go into that. But if you all have questions about that later, we can discuss it. I'd like to move on to something, so a person that is mentioned in Gaitan's article that I mentioned earlier, and that is Diana Kennedy. Diana Kennedy was a British food writer who in 1972 publishes The Cuisines of Mexico. And in that book, she distinguishes what she calls, quote, authentic interior Mexican food from the quote, mixed plates that were served or are served at US Mexican restaurants. And in that book, she then popularized the term Tex Mex as a label for Americanized hybrids and looked at them in a negative light, condemning them as inauthentic when compared to those interior Mexican food restaurants or places where that kind of food is served are prepared. And as a result of that publication in 1972, Mexican restaurants in the United States began labeling their menus as interior Mexican to attract more people to their restaurants, more clientele, but also to satisfy that purist trend that Kennedy had established in her book. And therefore, we see that an outsider, Kennedy, a British national, her definition reshapes what restaurateurs, many of them Mexican, call their own food. And this was done to appeal to non-Mexican customers who now have a kind of problematic framework for judging authenticity. What's interesting is that Kennedy received Mexico's Order of the Aztec Eagle, the government's highest honor for non-nationals, for her international promotion of Mexican food. And again, we see that an outsider whose intervention helped define authentic Mexican cuisine for an international audience is honored by the very country whose cuisine she claimed to be protecting or defending and promoting. This issue, this case that Gaitan mentions in her article relating to Kennedy, echoes what happens when tourists who come to Spain define or expect to be consuming authentic Spanish food, such as paella and sangria. And we see here in Spain how, at least in city centers or very touristy areas along the coast, how outsiders' definition of what authentic Spanish food is, the outsider being the tourist in this case, is adopted by the local Spanish market, and it becomes the standard against which everything else is measured. So I'd like to move on to Spanish food. What do you know about Spanish food? Oftentimes, when I ask my students in basic Spanish language courses, when we get to the food unit, and I ask them, well, what dishes, what typical Spanish dishes are you familiar with? I often hear things like, churros con chocolate, right? So churros are one of them. And then oftentimes I might hear paella. I might, but oftentimes my students don't, they're not familiar with that dish or even with the word. They might even say like tacos or enchiladas or nachos. So yeah, garlic chicken. Yes. Yes. And that would be a great one. That is definitely one of them. So I think a lot of times when we see that adjective Spanish, we assume that it might encompass foods from the Americas as well, from Spanish-speaking countries. Now, what ingredients do you think are typically present in Spanish cuisine, in traditional Spanish cuisine? And I know Sharon shared garlic chicken. And that can definitely be something that we see here in Spain for sure. Chicken is very popular and garlic is as well. Anyone else that wants to mention something in the chat? Olive oil, Mark says. Yeah, saffron, says Scott. Eggs and potatoes. I see adobo seasoning, cilantro, pork. Excellent. Anybody else? Other ingredients that are typically present in Spanish cuisine from Spain? Seafood, definitely. Garbanzos. Gracias, Kelly. Yeah, definitely. Okay, excellent. That's a great start. An excellent start. Rice. Definitely. Now, what dishes are you familiar with? So some of you have mentioned a few of them already. But what dishes would these ingredients be in? I mentioned paella, of course. Anything else? Any dishes? I know garlic chicken was mentioned earlier. Gazpacho, excellent. Spanish tortilla, tapas, for sure. All right. Patatas bravas, croquetas. All right, excellent. Okay. Now, have any of you ever eaten Iberico pork? Definitely. Have any of you ever eaten at a restaurant that specializes in Spanish cuisine in the United States or abroad, even in Spain if you visited Spain? And if so, I'd like you to think back to what that experience was like. Did the menu, did the atmosphere, did the food itself confirm or challenge your expectations of what traditional Spanish food could be like, or was, or is? And that's a bit of a rhetorical question, so you can think about that one. Okay. But what we also have to remember about any culture, right, is that Spanish culture in Spain is not a monolithic culture. It is made up of many different regions and autonomous regions at that, and different provinces with different climates and different ingredients that are available, of course. We know that we have Catalan culture, we have Basque culture, Galician culture, and then Andalusian culture, cuisines in the south. They're all different with their own histories, with their own languages, and their own identities as well. And we're going to see that there are, again, regional differences regarding food. You're going to find, see, oh, great, great, Chantel. You're going to find, yeah, in Barcelona, you're going to find a lot of that Iberico pork that you're going to find throughout Spain. You might have more access to fresh seafood since you're on the coast. Although I should say that in Madrid, even though we're right in the center of the peninsula, we have access to some of the freshest seafood, which always fascinates me when I'm here. All right, so let's move on to this slide where we have a number of different dishes that are often identified as some of the most authentic. And I know that some of you mentioned gazpacho, paella, tortilla, and I had mentioned churros or chocolate con churros as well. So you have some images here to take a look at. And I think if you were to talk to anyone who had visited Spain or who had gone to a Spanish restaurant or any Spaniard, what some of the most authentic Spanish dishes are, they would probably mention gazpacho as one of them. We're going to see that mostly in the south in Andalusia, but you can find that anywhere. Paella, we'll talk about this in a little bit, but it's typically from the northeastern region of Spain, but you'll find it everywhere as well. The tortilla española, the cocido madrileño, which is a chickpea and pork stew. The tortilla española, just for those who don't know, is a potato omelet. It's one of my favorites. We have the chocolate con churros, and these are going to be a little different from what you'll find in Mexico and in Latin America. In Spain, they are not served with cinnamon or sugar on top, but the chocolate is very thick and it is quite delicious and it's dark. And then we have chorizo, right? Which I'm guessing that a lot of you have probably either tried or you've heard about it. It is a smoked paprika sausage found on its own as its own tapa or ración, but also in many dishes as well. You might even find it in the cocido madrileño. Okay. All right. So we're going to return to this list at the end of the class. So we'll keep this list in mind, although we'll be talking about these different dishes. So I'll just share some personal photos, family photos. Two of these are from, I took since yesterday. The first one was from this morning. My partner took our two sons out for churros con chocolate at a famous churreria here in Madrid. And you can see, hopefully you can see how thick that chocolate is. And those churros are a little thinner than the ones that I showed you in the previous slide. But my partner says that they devoured them, and also were wearing some of the chocolate afterwards. In the middle, in the center picture, you see an image of my cousin's arroz. Okay, and arroz, for those of you who speak Spanish or understand it, means rice. And that is, they do not call it paella. This was served in southern Spain in the province of Granada, where my family's from. And that was served with pork rather than chicken. And there were vegetables in there. I know that they used even some squash in it. I think butternut squash to give it that like a little bit of a yellow or orange color. And then it was delicious. And then you see on the right-hand side a carton of gazpacho, that cold tomato-based soup that's typical in the summer. And we just got that from a local grocery store yesterday, and that's been our source of fresh veggies that we can have here in the apartment where we're staying for now. So you can buy that. You don't have to make it at home. All right. So what I'd like to move on to is a brief history of Spain. I think it's important if we're going to understand Spanish food, Spanish cuisine, we need to understand its history. We're going to talk about very briefly, in a very abridged version, the 8 centuries of cultural contact and exchange on the Iberian Peninsula, specifically in what we now call Spain. In 711, Muslim armies crossed from North Africa, beginning nearly 800 years of Arab and Berber presence on the peninsula. Between the years of 1085 and 1492, the Reconquista, or the reconquering, the Christian reconquering of this territory we now call Spain, unfolds gradually, where they reclaim territory city by city. It's important to note that during these years, between 1085 approximately and 1492 in Spain, Jewish, Muslim, and Christian cultures coexisted in relative peace and harmony. And they would have been exchanging goods. They would have been interacting on a daily basis, even though in cities at that time, they would have lived in separate neighborhoods, typically. Then in March of 1492, the Catholic monarchs, Fernando and Isabel, or Ferdinand and Isabella, expel the Jewish population. The Jewish population that would not convert to Catholicism. And so that was an estimated 150,000 to 200,000 Sephardic Jews were forced to leave Spain, taking along with them their culinary traditions. In October of 1492, the Catholic monarchs sent this explorer, Christopher Columbus, to discover or to find a new trade route. And then, of course, we know he stumbled across the Americas. And this initiated the Columbian Exchange that I'll talk about in a little bit, that would fundamentally transform what Spaniards grow in their gardens, what they cook, and how and what they eat. In the 16th and 17th centuries, these, and I say in quotes, and with respect, New World, of course, this is from the perspective of the Old World here in Spain, New World ingredients, such as tomatoes, peppers, chocolate, potatoes, beans, arrived in Spain, and they slowly became the defining flavors of what we consider now to be traditional Spanish cuisine, or authentic Spanish cuisine. Now, this then carries us to this question, or it leads us to this question. Why do people move, and what moves with them? And so we're going to talk a bit about migration and how migration can change the foods that an area might be consuming. I'd like for you all in the chat, if you can, you all have been great about that, is to share some ideas related to why people, individuals, groups of people might leave their home, their place of origin. And as I say here, it can be chosen, it can be forced, or it can be somewhere in between. So I'd like for you all in the chat, if you could, just to jot down some reasons for which people might leave their home to move somewhere else. And that can be within the national confines, national limits, or across borders. And Mark, I will get to your question. That's a great question about the Jewish population being expelled and their influence on food. We'll talk about that in a little bit. Thank you. Yeah, conflict or famine, as Daniel says. Amy says politics. Yeah, Elodie, excellent point. Abducted for slavery in the slave trade. Yes. Religious persecution, climate migration as well. Yeah, for religious and political reasons. Yeah, perceived opportunities elsewhere, for sure, Karen. Yeah, a wide range of economic reasons to find a better life. There are more opportunities, a new job, employment. Yep. Fresh beginnings, religious uprooting, exile. Mhm. Monetary reasons, disparities. So economic disparities, racial disparities. Yeah. Joining other family members who had previously left, war, conflict. Yeah, they can't afford where they live, or they were forced to leave. Yeah. Excellent. Guaranteed health care, climate. Excellent. Excellent. Feel free to continue, sharing if you'd like, but I'm just repeating what a lot of you have said already. One of the big reasons why people have migrated, have left one location to go to another is because of political conflict. So yes, they're fleeing violence, war, or authoritarian regimes, any kind of persecution, that economic instability, lack of opportunity, lack of access to food, even unemployment. Yes, environmental disasters, droughts, floods, crop failure, climate displacement, as some of you already mentioned, religious intolerance, which we see, of course, in Spain, um, family reunions and love, right? So joining other family members who have already chosen to leave, but then love as well. You might have met somebody, even just thinking in current times. Maybe you study abroad and you fall in love and you join that person. That happens a lot. It happened in my family. Yes, the search for opportunity to improve one's life or the lives of their children as well. Excellent. So, what do these individuals who migrate from one location to another, what do they take with them? And so here, part of the argument is that they would take their food, right? They take their recipes with them. They take their language, of course, their other aspects of their culture, their traditions, right? Um, but we see that these foods, these ingredients, the language, traditions are never unchanged. They experience transformation as well. So yes, ingredients become, or they can become unavailable and are substituted with local equivalents. Um, Techniques have to adapt to new kitchens or climates. Recipes um, are subject to our memory, and our memory is not perfect. We might forget some of those recipes, especially if they were shared and they were passed down in an oral manner and not written down. Um, and we see that also across generations, the diaspora version of a dish might be different. And so different from the original that neither community fully recognizes the other's version of it. So the question is not whether this transformation happened, because it does happen when people move from one place to another, but whether authenticity is the right standard by which to judge that food, that language, or those traditions that they take with them. And so I want to leave you with this as well. Diaspora, right? That kind of uprooting, that moving of a group of people from their original place to another does not corrupt culture. It does not corrupt a dish. It's culture. It's culture under the pressure of movement, of loss, and also um, invention at the same time. And so I'm going to move on to how migration really affects or affected Spain. It is, I believe, a story of cultural exchange, hybridity, which Kennedy would have considered to be less than or inferior, but I think we can all argue is not the case, and also transformation. So migration brought different ingredients, not just from the New World, but going back to 7-Eleven. Arab settlers introduced rice, saffron, and very sophisticated irrigation systems that made, for one, Valencia's rice fields possible. The Colombian exchange delivered tomatoes, peppers, tomatoes, and many other things, or potatoes. Without these movements of people and plants, the dishes that we're about to talk about wouldn't exist. We also know that migration changed the vocabulary. We know that words like aceite or olive oil or oil, arroz, which I mentioned earlier, rice, azúcar, sugar, or azafrán, saffron, are not incidental. They're evidence of a culinary culture that's so deeply absorbed here on the Iberian Peninsula that it became invisible in a way. And naturalized. So much so that Spaniards today, who might not really question what they're eating, would just assume that those ingredients were always here and they are just they're native to this land, and that they're traditional and authentic Spanish ingredients, but they're not. And we see how migration complicates this notion of authenticity, because if every defining ingredient of traditional Spanish food arrived through waves of migration, conquest, trade, and also expulsion, then the claim that any dish is purely or originally Spanish is hard to sustain. So we're going to take a look at different dishes, different traditional Spanish dishes. And I'd like for us to think about, well, these different kinds of questions, not necessarily where did this dish come from, but rather who gets to call this dish their own, or authentic, Spanish, and then also who gets to determine whether it is authentic. So I wanted to just take you to Al-Andalus. So between 711 and 1492, the majority of the Iberian Peninsula, in varying degrees throughout these years, was referred to as Al-Andalus. It was really controlled by the Muslims. And so we see that influence also in the kitchen and in agriculture. So the Arabs, as I mentioned before, they brought rice with them. Of course, we would not have paella if it hadn't been for the Arabs. We wouldn't have saffron, cumin, coriander, cinnamon, which form part of so many different dishes, both savory and sweet. They brought almond trees, citrus trees, eggplant and sugarcane, and this was essential, so important to just transforming the cuisine here. Again, going back to their irrigation systems, they created acequias, or acequia systems to enable year-round cultivation, which meant that people here could be eating fresh vegetables, fresh fruits, kind of throughout the year. And this was, if you look at the dates, and we think about the Dark Ages in the rest of Europe, for example, it was not so dark here on the Iberian Peninsula, at least with regard to knowledge, engineering, and then also taste, foods, access to food. We also know that almond sweets that are still made in the city of Toledo, right outside of Madrid, in Toledo convents, known as mazapan or marzipan, descended from Moorish confectionery that would have been combined with eggs, egg yolks, and with sugar. And we see here on the right-hand side of the screen the words related to food in Spanish and their Arabic origins. They're to the right. So aceite, azúcar, arroz, azafrán, albóndigas, almíbar, and really any al word. We just bought some albaricoques the other day, which is a delicious fruit, and the word is not coming to me right now, but it is a delicious little fruit that will come to me. But down at the bottom, I say that that al prefix is interesting. Every word above here absorbed that Arabic definite article the into Spanish. So when a Spanish speaker says el arroz, the rice, they're actually saying the rice. I just thought that was a fun linguistic tidbit. Now, one of you asked about the Jewish influence. So, yes, Jews who did not convert to Catholicism were expelled from Spain in 1492 by the Catholic monarchs. Those who remained in Spain, who did convert, they were able to remain, and it's most likely that they continued to prepare the dishes that their ancestors would have. Those who left, who were forced to leave, many of them went to North Africa. Many of them went to other parts of Europe or the Middle East. But for those who remained, they also left their stamp. And for those who left as well, they left their legacy here. The the food or the dish adafina was a slow cooked Sabbath stew that would have been prepared on Friday evening, and it would have been left over heat that night over a fire, so that no fire would be needed the next day. And this stew was made with chickpeas, with vegetables and lamb or beef, maybe sometimes rabbit, and it's a direct ancestor of the now cocido madrileño, an image that I showed you before. Now, after 1492, converso families, or these were Jewish converts to Christianity, they faced the scrutiny of inquisitors, and it was terrible during those years. And so many of them, to prove that they had converted to Christianity or to perform that Christian identity, they added pork to the stew. And many of them also would hang legs of cured ham from their doorways to prove to neighbors who might be watching and also to inquisitors that they were no longer Jewish, even if they still might have been practicing in secret. But by adding this pork to the stew, it was a way to signal to those inquisitors that the household was not secretly Jewish. So this authentically Spanish dish, this cocido madrileño that you find in Madrid and variations of it that you find throughout Spain, with that added pork, may have been designed to hide their prior Jewish identity. So this cocido, which is arguably the most typically Spanish dish, is inseparable from histories of religious persecution and forced conversion, and also identity performance, because Catholicism eventually was kind of equated with Spanishness as well, with true Spanishness. So the pork in this dish is not incidental, but was instead once a political act, a strategy. Now, I mentioned the Columbian Exchange, and this, of course, came about starting in 1492. We see that, again, foods like tomatoes and peppers would have been brought to Spain. Now, originally, the tomato was viewed very suspiciously. First, it was maybe thought to be ornamental, then maybe poisonous. But we see that, of course, now, after trial and error, it's been added to gazpacho, to sofritos, which form the base of many dishes in Spain and in Latin America. Pimentón, which comes from smoked paprika, or it is smoked paprika. It comes from peppers, dried peppers, and that's the defining flavor of chorizo. These would have all been impossible without those New World peppers and tomatoes and potatoes, of course. I can't imagine that Spanish omelet without them. Chocolate and vanilla, of course. Chocolate con churros brings together that Central American crop, also colonial trade, that also is linked, of course, to slavery, unfortunately. The Aztecs wouldn't have recognized the sweetened, milky Spanish version that we have here. And beans and corn are also popular. Corn, maybe not as much. You might find it a lot more in like salads and things like that. But beans, you'll definitely see a lot in that fabada asturiana, which is another variation on the cocido madrileño, a stew with meat as well. So this gazpacho, before the 15th century, it existed, but it was white, transparent even, and it had bread as its base with olive oil, garlic, and vinegar. And it was something that was consumed by day laborers, agricultural laborers in the South, but there wouldn't have been tomatoes. It wouldn't have been red. After 1492, of course, that changed. And today it's marketed internationally as quintessentially Spanish, the taste of Andalusia, the southern part of Spain, deeply traditional. And so now the fact that that tomato wasn't always here is kind of invisible to current contemporary Spaniards. They forget. They forget where that actually came from. The chocolate con churros really is the story of three continents in one cup. In Mesoamerica, we have cacao that's cultivated and drunk as chocolatl. It was bitter, it was spiced with chili, ground with water and corn, and it was a ritual drink associated often with royalty and with ceremonies. There wasn't any sugar, there wasn't any milk. Then in colonial Spain, cacao reached Spain in the 16th century. Spanish court cooks added cane sugar, which was introduced to the Iberian Peninsula by the Arabs, and eventually mixed it with milk, creating this thick, sweet drink. And then the churro, which was fried dough, was paired with the chocolate to dip in it. And today, chocolate con churros, as you saw in that picture of my children, is served in cafeterias throughout Spain as a winter breakfast staple. Also, a really great food after you've been out with friends drinking. But its primary ingredient comes from Mexico and Guatemala. So very interesting there. Now, paella, and this is the last dish that I'd like to talk about. Paella, many people will tell you here in Spain that it is not typically Spanish. And this is something that we don't expect coming from the United States. We just associate paella with Spain. People would say, purists would say that it is from Valencia, again, this autonomous region or community in the northeastern part of Spain. Paella originated in the rice-growing regions of Valencia. The traditional paella contains chicken or rabbit or both, green, long, flat beans, and snails, but no seafood. So I know that what they serve, if you're familiar with taparrillo in Fredericksburg, that seafood paella is not, it shouldn't be called paella. It might be called arroz con mariscos, which is seafood. And Valencians are notably sharp about what does and doesn't belong in a paella. Adding chorizo, that sausage, would be terrible. That would be a crime. Spanish paella, a lot of times what you see throughout Spain in touristy areas and not, that mixed, la paella mixta, is a tourist-facing invention that often flattens regional specificity into a national brand. So what we're going to see in this next slide is how Valencians, people from Valencia, define a true, real, authentic paella. This video clip is from the series Jose Andres and Family in Spain, I think from CNN. And Chef Jose Andres, who lives in the DC area, and his daughters visit Valencia and discuss what ingredients are needed in a true paella. Now, if you've ever tried a paella in the United States or elsewhere, I'd like you to think about what ingredients you remember being in the dish. Okay. And as we watch the video, I want you to think about whether or not the paella you ordered or tasted would be considered a true paella. And did its authenticity or inauthenticity make it any more or less enjoyable to eat? Okay. So we're gonna watch this video if you don't mind, and hopefully I can still share my screen with you all. All right, please do let me know if you can't see it. Oh no, you're not seeing it. Okay. Let's see. Let me see if I can share this. Here we go. Thank you all for letting me know. Is it visible now? You might not be, I haven't pressed play yet. Okay, great. Thank you. All right, if you can't hear it, please let me know. Okay. Sorry, you can't hear it. Okay. I'm going to disconnect. Let's try that again.
So, ladies, your first lesson starts here. We are eating a dish that most people will consider to be paella. The rice is cooked to perfection and it's served in a paella pan. But if we dig deeper, this is actually not what you think. This is arroz de pescados y mariscos, rice of seafood and fish.
So if this isn't paella, then what is?
Paella is hands down Spain's most famous dish. But there is a big difference between what you think is authentic paella and the real thing. Okay, people, don't worry. I know that Spanish restaurants around the world serve paella with seafood, peas, chorizo, all kinds of crazy things. But that's not real paella. Trust me, if you want true paella valenciana, seafood, no way. Forget all that fluorescent rice. Pack away the peas and kiss the chorizo goodbye. Don't believe me? Just ask the paella professionals. Hey! Oh my God! You see how hard this is?
Yeah.
One question. Yeah. I was telling my daughter it's paella valenciana. Yeah. It's no seafood involved.
No, para auténtico valenciano, la paella valenciana es la que se hace con el caldero, con el pollo y con el conejo, con el garrofón y la machoqueta.
This one over there. Esta es la valenciana. There are 10 key ingredients that go into a paella. And people here follow them to the letter, just like the 10 commandments. Olive oil, rabbit, chicken, green beans known as baguette, white beans called garrufo, tomato, rice, salt, saffron, and water, all found in and around Valencia. That will be paella valenciana. Everything else will be arroz.
¿Qué?
Rice of arroz de.
Arroz de, correcto.
We understand each other now.
Here in Valencia, they'll consider paella when it has a traditional ingredient. So that, for example, wouldn't be paella. It's
No.
rice of
Claro. But if it's this is paella valenciana. You have all the ingredients here. But now let's go to the dictionary. This is very important. If I open the Spanish dictionary, the dictionary says that paella is the pan or any dish cooked in a paella pan. So the dictionary is wrong. Who do we need to change? The people of Valencia or the dictionary itself?
The dictionary.
Boom, we solved the problem.
Okay. All right. Sorry about all of those technical difficulties. Can you all still hear me? All right, great. So what I'd like to do now is to move on to, I'm going to go back to our PowerPoint. And I would like to, hopefully, can you see the PowerPoint? All right. So we're going to move on to a different view of what paella is from a video called, well, it's from a blogger or vlogger called Spain Revealed when they visit a restaurant in El Palmar, Valencia. And we're going to listen to what Chef Raúl Magraner of the restaurant Bonaire says about traditional or authentic paella valenciana. And I want us to think about how his explanation differs from the definition that the cooks in the previous video with José Andrés provide about what a paella valenciana is. Okay, so I'm going to try to share my screen with you all again. You're still seeing the YouTube? Okay, great. All right. Do you see a different screen now? All right. Okay, we're going to watch this clip. Thank you all for your feedback.
So we've just arrived in El Palmar, the old fisherman's village where paella originated. We actually came here in our recent paella video, but we didn't eat paella here because, I mean, in the video, we couldn't eat paella everywhere. But today it's special because today we're going to eat a paella prepared by the chef who has won the best paella in the world award. And what's more, he's preparing a really unique paella just for us.
Cuando a mí me preguntan cuál es la paella valenciana, mi contestación es que hay tantas paellas valencianas como pueblos en Valencia. Porque antiguamente, es que antiguamente cada uno en la paella ponía lo que tenía en su casa o en su tierra. Porque si tú tenías alcachofas y eran paellas de temporada, no como ahora que tenemos un producto todos los días en casa.
Claro. Wow, look at all these paellas that are just bubbling away in various different stages of readiness. Boom, boom, boom. The snails in there. A black rice here. Looking beautiful. This is our one. So it hasn't started cooking yet. We have this very special, this crab.
Es un cangrejo que viene de la parte norte de América.
Sí.
Lleva ya muchos años empezando a invadir lo que es la zona europea.
Qué curioso.
Y ahora, desde hace alrededor de unos 6 años, entró en la Albufera.
Yoli, I think we have what may be the most beautiful paella I've ever seen.
It is very gorgeous. As a kid, I used to love the yellow and purple combo, and this has it. And so I just love it.
We're gonna see if we got some socarrat here.
Don't destroy it.
Yeah. Wow. Okay, I'm getting in there. Wow. It's scraping off the bottom. Ooh. Oh wow. It's almost sweet. A great pie, you can, each grain of rice is its own man, its own beast, you know? And it's dry. This is not a soupy rice. And yeah, you can taste each grain, and each grain is so full of flavor. Oh my God. It's like savory and sweet at once. It's beautiful. It is really good.
Let's see. The smell is very, it goes together with what it tastes like, obviously, but like it's bang on. The cauliflower there adds some wonderful level of, complexity. It's lovely.
It's that fine little layer of rice.
Yeah. Yeah, it's like 1 centimeter max.
Yeah.
You don't have a pork? You don't need a pork, I guess.
Yeah.
That's the philosophy.
Ooh, wow. It's like a crab pate. And what I love, in the core of Raul's philosophy is that the paella, or any poor person's dish, any fisherman's dish, anything like that, is always just a representation of what is local. He says that there are as many paellas that are authentic as there are villages of Valencia, because every village has a different slight mix of ingredients. And so in the end, this new ingredient arrives, this crab, and it's everywhere. And he's helping the local fishermen by buying it and evolving the paella.
Hay que aprovechar. La cocina de aprovechamiento es lo que tiene, aprovecharlo. Y si lo que tiene ya antiguo lo puedes evolucionar, hay que evolucionar. La cocina siempre evoluciona. Evoluciona la paella y evoluciona toda la cocina.
And then here we have this beautiful, big, meaty, like pink prawn or something. There's the sweetness right there.
Okay, I'm going to pause it there. I know that we're getting close to our time, so I'm going to move back quickly to our PowerPoint, but I want to talk about briefly the fact that this chef who has won the title of the best chef of paella in Spain has a very different definition and explanation for what paella what it should be, and that it is something that evolves. These traditions evolve. What we believe to be something authentic can change with time. And so I think that's important to keep in mind. These are very different philosophies regarding paella and what it is and what it represents. So now that I see that we are close to time, I'm going to move on just to say that paella is it is a story. It does reveal this story of migration. You see these different ingredients that are involved in whether it's the traditional paella valenciana or not. All of these ingredients come from other places. The beans that are typical of that supposedly traditional paella, those come from the quote, New World. We see that, saffron and tomatoes, paprika, they all come from elsewhere. So it's important to remember that these now traditional dishes, these now supposedly authentically Spanish dishes or Valencian dishes, really are a myth. And that food, just like culture, just like language, dishes, they're constantly evolving and constantly changing. So to take us back to the beginning, to think about that recipe that you all thought about, that family recipe, I'd like to take a look at the right hand of the screen. And I want you to think about whether anything that we've discussed today might change how you think about what made that family dish authentic. And also to think about that next question. If your grandmother's dish or your grandfather's, great-grandfather's dish, was itself the product of migration and substitution, which most certainly it was, does that make it any less real, true, any less hers or his or yours? So I think I'll leave you with that. I'd love to talk about a lot more. I had a lot more planned, but I went over here. So I want to open it up to questions or comments that anyone might have. And thank you so much for your time and for allowing me to come and talk to you today.
So thank you for that talk, Antonia. It's actually a perfect follow-up to what we discussed in class yesterday, which was that definition of authenticity. And what we had trouble determining in the student group was kind of, if authenticity is something that changes over time, how do you know at what stage is it authentic, right? If we can accept that it's because of migration and all these other things you mentioned, right? Is it We couldn't agree that the first one was always the authentic one, but then at what point, how do you know when to stop and what's authentic? Or as the video showed, are there multiple possibilities for authenticity that can vary by region or ingredient or tradition or whatever it might be?
So true. So true. And I think that's true. Like when do we start considering or stop considering that something is authentic, right? Especially these ingredients that were kind of lent to at least in this case, the Iberian Peninsula, like tomatoes. I mean, gazpacho, I mean, now is I can't even imagine it without tomatoes, right?
Yeah.
So what's the authentic version? Is the authentic version the transparent white version with the bread without the tomato, or is the authentic version now with the tomato and with peppers? Because I put peppers in mine as well. Yeah, it's such a good question. And I think there can be. It's subjective, kind of like Gaitan says in her article. I mean, it's completely socially constructed. This notion of authenticity or something being authentic or real, and is very subjective. Any other questions that anyone might have? Or comments? There were some great questions before. I don't know if I answered the question about, Sephardic traditions, but that's one that I think is one of the saddest. I really do see it as a tragedy I mean, when groups of people are discriminated against or aren't valued as a people, as individuals, as a culture, what happens is that when they're forced out or when they're silenced, their traditions are silenced in a way as well, or they're reappropriated. And so in the Spanish context, what we see is with the adafina, that stew, that Sabbath stew, is that it has been adopted it was adopted by Christians, and it was reappropriated. It was given a different name. Pork was added to it. And it's known as cocido madrileño, or as different variations of it. And no credit has been given to the Sephardic community, their contributions to what we now consider to be authentic Spanish cuisine or traditional Spanish cuisine. The same thing came up in this class that I was teaching this past semester. I had made an almond cake, and it's called in Spain tarta de Santiago. And it doesn't have any leavening agents in it. It's made with almond meal and sugar and eggs, and some citrus. And I had a student who was a practicing Jewish person, and he said, "Well, this is a Sabbath cake." And I said, "Yes." And so I looked into it. We researched it, and we realized that yes, this cake was given a very Catholic name after St. James's cake, but it was reappropriated from the Jewish tradition, and so that is sad. We don't really have many cookbooks because, of course, recipes for a long time were just passed down from generation to generation in an through oral transmission, not through written transmission. And so many of those recipes have been lost or they've been reappropriated. And Marcel, if you're talking, sorry, I can't hear you if you are. But yes, for any of you who might have a question or a comment, please feel free to write in the chat. Or if you'd like to reach out to me via email, I can share my email with all of you as well. I see, Mark, you have a question. Even those who are eating an authentic dish will have different experiences. Some will eat the crab and others will avoid the seafood. Some will eat the olives and others avoid the artichoke. You're so right. That's very true. Everyone has a different experience with these authentic dishes. Or again, what we think is authentic, someone else might not think is authentic or true. Okay. Thank you, Marcel. Is the Q&A box, and I'll stop sharing actually. I'm not sure that I see where the Q&A box is.
It would be on the bottom to the left of the more. I can see it though, and I'm watching that.
Okay. It's in the bottom left.
Did I say left, right? Sorry, by the more. Oh, now I see 6 all of a sudden out of the blue. Let's see.
Oh, yes, I see. Okay. Thank you, Scott. Yeah, I see yours. So was the cooking expert in the first video subscribing to a definition of authenticity that gives honor to an original or first way of eating the dish? When it comes to paella, and Scott, so I'm not sure if you're able to answer this. The expert, I don't know if you mean Jose Andres, the chef, who's visiting the restaurant, or if you mean the individual who's describing what a paella is and saying that it's the dictionary that needs to change its definition of what a paella is. I would say that Jose Andres doesn't, based on other videos that I've seen, doesn't necessarily agree with being so strict in terms of what a paella is or a Valencian paella is. So I think in other videos, he kind of questions whether we should honor that original form of the dish. But I think that the man that he interviews just would agree that we do need to honor that original or first way of eating it. Thank you for your questions. And then Cheryl, you say traditions are lost or adapted from generation to generation since there's, yeah, often no written recipe. An excellent point. Salem, you say in the video they talked about how words changed meaning. Is this mostly due to cultural exchange or discovery? Yeah, so I'm guessing, I'm not sure if you mean Salem in the first video or in the second one with that really pretty rice with the purple kind of flowers. But I think words can change in meaning, especially thinking, about this word authenticity and traditional. It might be due to cultural exchange and discovery as well, I would say. And Elodie, as someone with food allergies, I'm very thankful that we're not limited by some rather arbitrary definition. I would not be able to eat Valencian paella because of the rabbit. Yeah, I agree. Rabbit is not my favorite, my meat of choice or my protein of choice. So I'm with you. I'm with you there. I appreciate variety and hybridity. Helen, thank you. You say even if a person was the only witness to an event, and therefore is considered the only authentic description of the event, that person has biases, perceptions. Exactly. It's very subjective. Their account may not be the accurate account. Seems like authentic is an artificially honored adjective. I think that's a great point. I also see Karen in the webinar chat says, think borscht fits this category. That's a great point. Most think of it as beets, yet go to Ukraine, and every village has its own version, and many do not use beets. Yeah, great point. Excellent points.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yes. Okay. I would like to add an example of constructed authenticity, and that is pad thai. So I don't know if you know, but pad thai was actually a recipe that's a Thai government actually sent out to all the immigrant Thai people around the world, and came up with ingredients that are relatively easy to acquire even abroad, and constructed a flavor that was, Thai adjacent, let's say,
Yeah.
and made it basically an ambassador for Thai cooking. So, but this is something where I think a recipe or a certain dish is kind of, constructed as authentic, even though it didn't really bubble up from the pots of the local people, what was actually sent abroad to be authentic, ordered authentic.
That's a great point. A great example.
Hmm.
I didn't really know the history behind pad thai, but now that's fascinating.
And maybe one other thing about Diane Kennedy. I have one of her cookbooks, and if you read the introduction, actually, she says there quite freely that those recipes come actually from the cooks of her friends. So, which kind of, tells us first there is a class aspect to it. So her friends are not cooking themselves. They have cooks that cook
Wow.
that authentic Mexican food for them. And secondly, there's also the aspect of appropriations, because she takes those recipes, puts them in her cookbooks, and makes quite a lot of money with it, while those people that actually came up with those recipes don't see a dime from it. No, so I think that's an interesting aspect too. Even though it's very authentic, actually, our colleague who is from Mexico here in the department, she told me that she's using actually that Diane Kennedy cookbook to cook her Mexican recipes. So.
Wow. Wow. But yeah, that is interesting about class and how sometimes these outside these outsiders that claim what is authentic are really yeah, class can play a role there as well. And the authentic, maybe those authentic dishes are coming. Sorry, I'm just thinking about that. Maybe those authentic dishes are not coming from necessarily the upper classes. They're being produced by people from more modest experiences, more modest backgrounds as well.
I think one of the more interesting definitions of authenticity you brought up was the purity definition, which is not one that I would have thought of off the top of my head. And it made me think about what we've been talking about the last few days of the fact that taste is something that's negotiated among producers and consumers and critics even, right, and institutions. So I'm wondering that I think we clearly see the natural progression of cuisines over time, but the idea of responding to critics in particular and consumers maybe to a lesser degree, it seems like that might automatically make something inauthentic, right? If if it's just please,
Right.
the consumer, and at all cost, is that sort of an automatic almost bastardization of the recipe?
Yeah.
It seems like that's more of a sticking point to a degree as opposed to the natural movement migration changes that we've seen.
Very, very true. And Gaitan touches on that in the article as well, how these Mexican restaurants in the United States, the owners feel pressure to probably, going all the way back to what Kennedy said in 1972 about true, authentic Mexican cooking. I mean, I think a lot of, based on this article that Gaitan wrote, many restaurateurs, Mexican restaurateurs, worry that food critics or their clients are going to consider their food to be inauthentic. And so also to compete with those other restaurants, neighboring restaurants that might be deemed authentic or good, they now feel pressured to do the same things that those other restaurants do, even though it's not authentically Mexican. So like serving not like chips and salsa, for example, which is not something necessarily that you find in Mexico, but it's just something that is done, in U.S. restaurants.
Yeah.
So to kind of compete, to be able to compete and attract clientele that will come back to your restaurant, they make these choices and decisions that are inauthentic
Right.
to Mexican culture and cuisine. Yeah, it's a great point. I see some other questions here. Let's see. All right. So every Christmas, my kids and I select a country to base our menu off of. Last year it was Spain, and the dishes we made were delightful. My son loves to travel and bring back his culinary insights. It gives us experience into how to make different foods, but also how challenging it can be to get ingredients, definitely. And we find this living in the United States and trying to reproduce, we love to make paella. We call it paella in the States, but I think in Spain, and my family here in Spain would call it just arroz, so just rice, with other things. But it's very difficult to get the same quality of ingredients in the United States. And then things are very expensive, to access those ingredients. It's not cheap. So it is difficult. And then Scott, your question, I wonder if we could link this discussion to questions of globalization. Is a focus on authenticity also a way of combating the flattening out of cultures? To what extent can talk of authenticity be understood as a fear of losing one's own culture? Those are excellent questions. I'm drawn to that last one. To what extent can this talk of authenticity be understood as a fear of losing one's own culture? I think there has to be a connection there. Again, that idea of family recipes and maybe wanting to protect them and keep them and follow them to the letter, so that things aren't lost, so that that tradition isn't lost, that dish isn't lost, those family members who used to make it aren't completely lost. I think for sure. Great question, Scott. And Mark, there is a Taste of Fredericksburg Facebook group. I find it interesting that sometimes people will comment how a dish at an authentic restaurant is not as good or appealing as they get at an American version of the restaurant. Oh, interesting. Good point, Mark. You too, Mark. And just going back to what you had mentioned, Brooke, about purity. I'm sure that there are many other scholars who talk about that and link it to this concept of authenticity. But it was just something that as I was, playing around with this presentation for today, I was thinking about what Kennedy says about Tex-Mex and how that hybridization, makes it less authentic and therefore less valuable, less meaningful, less real. And so I was just, I'm sure, again, other people have probably talked about this, but that link to purity I found to be interesting and, of course, problematic, because I'm not familiar with the book. I'm not familiar with Kennedy's book, but it does seem as though the way that she describes these Tex-Mex restaurants would be as inferior to actual Mexican restaurants, and that they've been tainted, that it's not pure Mexican food.
Oh,
And then, of course, that can relate to race and class as well. Marcel.
yeah, just wanted to say, so if there are no more questions, we can probably wrap it up. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you for the opportunity to speak with you all today. And I loved seeing all of your comments and questions as well. So thank you. And thank you to Dr. DeLauro and to Dr. Rotter for inviting me to do this today.
Okay. So the UMW students log in with the other Zoom in 5 minutes, and we will continue the discussion there. So you will find this this video recorded, and I will put it on the same website where the other one was. So I will resend next week the invite for the next one on Tuesday, and then I also will resend the recording page. Okay, thank you very much, everyone.
Bye-bye, everybody.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.